guys, it's Tasman the Aspiring Kryptonian here. Welcome to episode 2 of Comic Book Chatter. I hope you enjoyed the first episode, and like I said, it's going to be weekly, so get used to it. So for those that haven't watched the episode, what we basically do is go through the new releases for the comic books, go through the back issues that I've picked up that week, and also go through the comics that I've read as part of my Ultimate Superman reading order, which I'm currently reading through 1947 now. So onto the new releases in the US, we have Superman issue 22, which is by Brian Michael Bendis, with art by Evan Rice, Alex Sinclair and Joe Prado, and variant cover by Brian Hitch, which we'll go through in a second. But just onto the cover for the standard cover first, by Evan Rice, Joe Prado and Alex Sinclair. As usual, it's another masterpiece. That, like I said before, that creative team are incredible, and I really enjoy seeing the artwork in the pages and also on the cover. And the variant by Brian Hitch is amazing as well. It's really action-packed, and for me it really captures what Superman's all about. You see, despite the odds and where he's lifting up some fire-stricken object in a house, saving a little girl, he still has that patience and care for each individual person that he's saving, and that's clear in this. In a nutshell, the comic itself is a really good issue. It's action-packed all the way through, and it's kind of split into two different sequences. The first one being where it kind of revolves around the whole story between Superman and Mongol, who have been fighting for the past, well, maybe 4 or 5 issues, but this kind of comes to an end. But there is one thing that kind of, it didn't annoy me, but it would have been better if that issue was released after, so it kind of tells you to go back and read or look back to the events in Superman Villains, which was released I think a month or so ago. So it's kind of taken it out of the continuity a little bit, so I think it would have been better if the story carried on and that issue was released afterwards. But I know that issue also linked with the Action Comics storyline as well, so I understand why they've done it, but it would have been a lot clearer, or even if there was a little bit of a mini description in this issue, because if someone hasn't picked that up, they're now going to have to pick that up to find out what happens, which can be annoying. But as a avid comic reader, Superman comic reader, I have picked it up and it does make sense, but again, I did have to go back and refer to it before, so yeah, it would be a lot easier if that wasn't the case. Now I have to say, the artwork in it and, well, the whole storyline of the Superman and Mongol thing I've really enjoyed, and I have to say the artwork in the panel, it kind of reminds me of the whole Superman Doomsday fight. That's how epic it's been. Even though it's just in a page in a comic, you can actually feel and see you can see the emotions in the characters' faces, and you can also feel every single punch just by looking at it. You can sense the pain in it, and you can really see how high the stakes are in this issue. And the second part of it is kind of completely separate, but it's about Lois Lane having a confrontation with Agent Cameron Chase. Again, this is another thing that's been kind of building up in the last few issues, where Superman declared himself as the patriot of Earth for the United Planets. So yeah, people weren't happy about that, and we kind of saw bits of, well, we saw the anger from some of the people in the previous issues, but this kind of, they're not angry. They have the support for him and they respect him and Lois Lane for all the help that they've done, but also it's kind of, they've come as a warning to say, listen, if you mess up, then there's going to be trouble. What I really liked about their exchange is the fact that they're both as, not volatile, but they're both as badass as each other, and they kind of, it seems almost like they're trying to one-up each other. Neither of them back down, and they're both jabbing and jibbing throughout their conversation, so that's quite fun to see. It's nice to see someone on the same level as Lois Lane, and likewise as well. So that was quite fun to see, and I hope we get to see more of her, and, well, I assume that we're going to, and that she's going to be kind of policing the actions that Lois and Clark and Superman and Superboy take in the coming issues, so I'm excited to see what happens with that. And I just want to give a little mention to Dark Knight's Death Metal issue 1, which is out this week as well. I admittedly haven't read the whole story before it, so the Batman Who Laughs, I know I've seen a little bit or read a little bit of it in Batman Superman issues, which that's the only introduction that I've had towards that kind of storyline, admittedly. So I think the whole issue would make more sense if I did go back and read it. or if you have already read it. But yeah, it's by Scott Snyder, and it's an enjoyable issue. I thought it was a little bit wordy in some parts, but I think that's obviously to set the scene and kind of give you a little context as to what happened previously. But I'm not going to go into too much detail about it because Superman's not actually in this issue, or there's a few mentions of him, but that's about it. But I just wanted to highlight some of the covers because they are amazing, and particularly the variant cover by Francesca Mattina, which is Superman in all of his glory, and you know, this kind of look of Superman we've not really seen before. So it's I like seeing all these different aspects of Superman, because even though he is one character, he's come in so many different forms, whether it's sort of an Elseworld story, or whether it's just a completely different suit, different design. I think it's really fun to see all these different takes, and I think this one is one of the most unique ones that we've ever seen, and the detail that Mattina has gone to, as he does with all of his covers, is incredible. Onto the digital comics this week, which is Man of Tomorrow 7. So this one's taken, so previously issues 1 to 6 were by Robert Venditti, and this issue has started sort of not a reboot, but there's a different creative team working on it. So the cover, first of all, is by Yasmin Putri. Admittedly, but other than her work on the deceased variant covers, I don't really know too much about her artwork or her art style, but from what I've seen on Deceased, she did the variant covers for the horror film posters, which were incredible. And this cover is completely different to that. This cover seems to be sort of rough around the edges a little bit, but I kind of like that because it shows like an action shot of what's happening. And combined with the colours as well, it's kind of like godlike, makes Superman look kind of angelic with the light in behind him, which is quite nice. But yeah, it's nice to see a completely different side to Yasmin Putri's work. Like I said before, I'm not 100% familiar with her previous work other than on Deceased, but I'm going to be sure to check out some of the other pieces that she's done as well from this. Unusually, this issue is kind of broken into 2 separate stories with a slightly different creative team on both. The first one is called Viral, and it's essentially about that. You've got a superhero called Saw who has taken Jimmy on as his kind of apprentice, I guess, to take all the photos of him and do his press on, what do they call it? ViewTube, which is quite funny, and Twitter. What I liked about the opening sequence is that you can see how much of a friend Superman is to Jimmy. It's not just to save him when he needs the help, but also for moral support and advice. So that seeing that friendship like that is quite nice, because when he was Clark Kent and saw that Jimmy was upset, he didn't go after him, and he thought obviously it was a job for Superman to be able to talk to him, and that was quite nice. What I also liked is the fact that Superman then went on to trust Jimmy, even though he had a hunch that there was something a little bit off with Saw, this new superhero, coming into Metropolis. And of course, as Superman is, he was right. And of course, Superman was right. So Saw is essentially releasing or paying off villains from different areas. So you have Firefly and Killer Moth, I think, from Gotham, who come in, and he basically pays them to do that. They get arrested, or he catches them, and then he pays for their bail to get them out of prison, and that's how he gets his views on ViewTube. So it's all about a publicity stunt, and obviously that doesn't sit well with Superman because he's actually putting people's lives in danger and just doing it for the sake of his own ego. So I enjoyed the first part of the issue. It's, again, what I like about, I know Superman's obviously been around for ages, and we're constantly evolving in the way that we view things, and I think Jimmy Olsen, the standalone series, has done quite well with this, where they introduce and explain how people use these sort of social media things, and obviously, yeah, they can be used for good things, but they can also be used for bad things, and just a case of this superhero wanting to boost his ego by putting people in danger is something that you do actually find on YouTube, which is really sad. That's the sad thing about it. But it's interesting to see a take in a Superman story on this. And on the second issue, you're kind of just thrown straight into the deep end. So there's not really much explaining on the context-wise, but I guess you kind of get to that as you go through the issue. But yeah, it's pretty intense. And it's an interesting concept again. Now, both issues have been written by David Vilgos, and I'm sorry if I say that wrong. I'm not very familiar with how to pronounce his name, but they're both really good issues. The second one, Superman basically goes to another planet to be trained, but you're not really sure on what he's being trained on. And you wouldn't even think Superman would need any more training as it is, because he's the world's greatest hero. But the issue is quite reminiscent, so he kind of goes back and explains. So the person that he's talking to says that the way he speaks about being Kryptonian, it's as if he's got another race in him, which obviously is Earth, and he was raised by Jonathan and Martha Kent. So he kind of goes on to explain that, and it's got a few nice little flashback scenes, which I really liked, because it shows how, even though they don't have this otherworldly strength, John and Martha, they don't have this otherworldly strength, how much they've helped Superman develop who he is as a character and as a person. And the artwork for the second half is by Miguel Mendonca, and there's some really great action sequences in there. There's a panel in particular where Superman uses all of his power, and you can see how much power is radiating off him. It's really cool to see, so check that out if you haven't read it already. Now, last week there were no new releases physically for comics in the UK. That's obviously due to the coronavirus and the delay in dispatch and all that sort of stuff. So this week I was quite surprised when I got a wad of comic books through the door. So clearly this is the backlog of comics. I think there's still a few missing that I've pre-ordered. But yeah, let's go through these. We've got a lot to go through, so bear with. Now, I'm going to start with Lois Lane because we talked about that last week. And I won't go into too much detail just because we have already talked about it. So these are the two covers. The first one by Mike Perkins and the second one by Joelle Jones and Jordie Bellaire. So Mike Perkins' covers are really detailed. I really like these because they're so gritty and they really represent the inside of the comic. And obviously they have kind of double meanings, like I mentioned last week as well. So you've got Lois within this whirlpool, which is overall is an actual target. So I think personally, I think that perfectly reflects the contents of the issue. Going on to the variant cover, like I said, by Joelle Jones and Jordie Bellaire. I love this comic, well, this cover. It really reminds me of tattoo art, which I'm a big fan of, and it's just really vibrant. It's very feminine, very in your face, and very 70s film poster, like I mentioned last week. So I'm a really big fan of that one, so I'm glad to add that to my collection. So now moving on to some issues from, I think, 2 weeks ago, which we've only just got. So obviously Superman's Pal Jimmy Olsen, both covers. And yes, I know they are the same comic book, but I like to have both covers because I'm a Superman collector and I'm eventually going to be trying to go for the world record, so quantity is everything. So you have the standard cover by Steve Lieber. What I love about these issues, well, these covers actually, is just like the Lois Lane one, it perfectly captures what happens in the comic. It's crazy, it's mad. Like I said before, you can never really anticipate what to expect from a Jimmy Olsen cover, just because the contents is crazy and so are the covers, and I kind of love that about it. It's really different. And then we have the cover by Ben Oliver. Now, I'm a big fan of Ben Oliver, his work on Deceased, and also the variant covers on Jimmy Olsen, which he's been doing throughout the whole series. Each and every one of them is great, and I think he really captures Jimmy Olsen perfectly there, because despite all the danger that's going on around him, he's the one that's stroking the dog, and I'm not gonna lie, that would probably be me in that situation as well. But yeah, I love these covers, and I think Ben Oliver's artwork is just really realistic, and it captures everything, it captures the character perfectly. Now, inside the issue, I think this is probably one of my favourite ones. I know we've only, well, another one that we're coming to the end of. There's only two issues left. So it's kind of all bringing all these random parts of the story, and with the Jimmy Olsen one, they are really random parts. So each comic issue is split into these tangents where you're in a different city or you're in a different situation, but it's kind of bringing it all together now. So it's all starting to make a lot more sense, and we now know who the culprit is, who's actually trying to kill Jimmy, which we've kind of been waiting to find out since the beginning. And there's a moment in this actually that really made me laugh out loud. It's towards the end. I'm not going to spoil it for you if you haven't read it, but I think you'll know the moment I mean when you do read it. So now on to Batman Superman, which again is 2 weeks old, so you may have already read it and read the review that we posted a couple of weeks back. But I'm really enjoying this. I think I've read some mixed reviews on it. Some people aren't really enjoying it, but I am, and I think everything that Joshua Williamson's done with the series so far is completely different to what we've seen with those particular characters or parts of Superman history. So previously the bottled City of Kandor, we've never seen it used in that way before, and to be honest, what I love about this series is that it's brought some classic Superman characters back into the limelight. So this one kind of leads on to Ultra Humanite, which is Superman's first ever villain. And to be honest, in the comics that I've read, other than the issue where he first came out, was first introduced, I haven't seen him used at all. Like I said, in the comics that I read, I'm sure he has been used, but I'm really excited to read more about him. And once again, the covers for this issue are amazing. So this one's by Clayton Henry with colours by Alejandro Sanchez. And once again, it perfectly captures what's going on in the comic. I love the use of the colours on there. If you can see it properly there, you can see all the purple and the light. It's just, even though it's cartoonistic, it's very realistic at the same time, especially the detail in the skull here, on Atomic Skull. The variant is by Mike Mayhew. Now, personally, well, because this is so realistic, it really reminds me of when people recreate scenes with action figures. I don't know if you get the same vibe. If you look closely, they're kind of, I think they do anyway, personally, and that's not a bad thing at all. It's not a jip. It's amazing. Very realistic and very action-packed. But one thing I did wonder is, Superman's obviously flying here. What's Batman doing? Is he jumping? Because if he is, he's jumping pretty far, and Superman's going to have to catch him at the bottom. And another one that's a couple of weeks old is Action Comics 1022. I find it really hard to say the numbers. I don't know what to say, 1022 or 1022, but here we go. So obviously the covers are by John Romita Jr., which I know a lot of people aren't a fan of, clearly, based on the comments on the review that we posted. But I think this one's one of the best out of the series that he's done. I like the way it kind of whooshes, and you can see the flight path that they're both taken, and it's nice to see Superboy, Connor Kent and Superman together again. And the variant cover by Lucio Perillo, which he's done a few of these now, I think maybe 2 or 3, with more upcoming. And I just love how realistic they are, because you can see the detail there. It's just amazing. It's really cool. So yeah, I'll be collecting each and every one of these because I'm a big fan, and I will probably frame a few of them actually, because some of them are really good. I think his Superman is definitely based on Tom Welling. Well, that's the kind of vibe that I get when I see his Superman. But yeah, they're amazing. So this issue is all about the reuniting of the Kents, which, well, I guess the House of Kents Part 1 makes more sense. But yeah, this issue kind of raised more questions than it closed for me, which mostly is, why doesn't Superman remember all of this that happened between Connor Kent, his parents, and, well, their parents? And yeah, we just need to know, well, it's kind of, I thought this whole series was kind of closing down to the main spectacle, but that certainly isn't the case, and it's kind of thrown more spanners in the works and more questions in the works definitely as well. So I'm excited to see what happens with that. While I'm here, I want, since we just talked about Action Comics 1022, I kind of wanted to touch on the fact that Bendis is leaving the Superman comics. Now, I'm not 100% sure whether he's leaving Action Comics and the Superman title, but I think it's definitely at least the Superman title based on what I've read. And I have to say, I've really enjoyed his run of Superman. I know the truth has been, well, Superman's truth has been, or secret has been revealed quite a few times in DC Comics history. But I just think it's one of those things that, even though they refresh it or completely restart once it's done, I think it's one of those things that's interesting to be explored, especially when you move with the times. So I think the last time was around 10 to 20 years ago, whereas this now with the mainstream and mobile phones and the internet, it's a completely different story. And I think that's what Bendis wanted to touch on, and I've really enjoyed it, and especially with the introduction with these new characters. So I know it's a separate title, but we've got Naomi, we've got Miss Leone, which I really want to know a lot more about her, because she seems to have all of these Superman memorabilia. She's almost like a collector. So she has the car that he is with, that he picks up in the first Action Comics cover, which, well, I think it's that car. It's very similar and it's kind of smashed up in the same way. And she has, I think there was some comic books with the Justice League titles and things like that. So I just want to know what the connection is and what her interest specifically collecting those things are. So I just think he's introduced some really interesting characters and concepts. And yeah, I will be a little bit sad when he leaves, but at the same time, I'm excited for what the future holds. And I hope, well, to be honest, I would really love Tom Taylor to write Superman. I'm a big fan of Tom Taylor's, as you've probably guessed from my deceased reviews. But yeah, I'd love to see his take on it. Robert Venditti, who wrote the Man of Tomorrow miniseries, which was released on digital and also in the 100-page Superman Giant. I'd love to see his take. Well, we've seen his take on Superman. It's very nostalgic and it's kind of a breath of fresh air, I think. So it'll be interesting to see what he does more with the character going forward if he did take it on. But personally, I really hope the creative team, when I say creative team, I mean the art team, so Joe Prado, Alex Sinclair and Evan Rice, I really hope that they stay on the title, because their artwork, especially combined together, is fantastic. And I think they've brought us some of the best Superman covers and artwork that we've seen for a long time, probably since when Jim Lee was working on the Superman books, I think. But I'm a big fan of theirs, and I really do hope that they stay, or at least come back every now and then. But I guess we'll have to wait and see what DC has in store for us. I did actually miss a comic out that I got, and that was the 100-page Superman Giant. So yeah, the stories that are in these are pretty old. Well, when I say pretty old, they're kind of maybe like 4 or 5 weeks old. Because this is Man of Tomorrow 3. Now, it was digitally released, and I prayed that it was going to be released physically, and I didn't realise that they were actually the stories until I saw this cover in this comic. So these are the Walmart 100-page giants, so if you want the stories physically, pick those up. But yeah, like I said, I love Robert Vendetti's Superman. It's very nostalgic, it's like a breath of fresh air, because it's the same, but it's completely different to what we used to at the same time. So it kind of reminds me of going back to sometimes the golden age with some of the problems that he tackles. There was an issue on gambling, and in the old Superman comics in the golden age specifically, there's a lot of that going on, where he tackles or tries to stop gambling in cities, and even the Superboy comics, he stops children from gambling on pinball machines and things like that. But then not only do you get Robert's story, you also get different stories. So Supergirl's story, Superman versus Brainiac, Bizarro, and so on and so forth. Now because I spent so much on that backlog of comics that arrived today, obviously comics add up and they are quite expensive, especially the 100-page giant, which is a little bit more expensive than normal. I've only picked up one comic for my collection on the back issues, and obviously, as I mentioned, I'm filling in the gaps for the Adventures of Superman, and I picked up issue 605. Now I know I've skipped a few issues that I need, so I think, off the top of my head, I think 596 I skipped because it's more expensive, because it's actually recall, because there's something to do with 9/11 in the comic, so I'm looking forward to getting that one. So once again, I'm not really sure of the context to this comic. Like I said, I'm reading from the start with my reading order, so I don't really want to jump in and start reading random issues until I get there, really. But yeah, this cover certainly is interesting, and also we have Superwoman, and Owlman actually, who are from the Crime Syndicate, so I'm pretty sure Ultraman will probably make an appearance at some point within this series. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to going through and actually reading what these were about. She has some very skimpy clothes on there, you can kind of see a little bit of everything. But yeah, I'm a big fan of the Superwoman costume. I know Superman obviously stands for everything good, but I'm a huge fan when you see the opposite, if that makes sense. So obviously Superwoman is bad in the crime syndicate, as is Owlman and Ultraman if you just make an appearance. So I'm a sucker for those moments when that happens, because you can just, well, just like with how everyone kind of not wishes Superman was, but sometimes he holds back. But obviously these people don't have morals, and that obviously makes them stronger, like Faora says in Man of Steel. But yeah, I'm looking forward to reading this issue, and when I do get to it, I'll let you know what I think. So, to be honest, I've kind of been slacking a little bit on my Superman reading order reading. Usually I like to kind of get maybe 5 or 6 issues in a day to try and cover the year within a week. But I think this week I've kind of been doing 1 or 2 issues a day. So at least I can kind of go into more detail on the ones that I have read. And I think so far my favourite from 1947 has to be World's Finest Comics 28. Now what happens in this issue is basically Lex Luthor creates another amazing invention which brings statues to life and obviously allows him to do his evil bidding with them. So you kind of see all these random situations or sequences that you probably wouldn't normally see Superman do. So he, Anubis, you see Anubis carrying out King Tutankhamun, I can't even say it, King Tut, let's leave it at that, carrying him out of a museum because obviously Lex Luthor wants the mummy. You see Superman fighting 2 marble lions, which you'll never see that again. And he also fights, races Mercury and fights Hercules. But it's just a little bit of fun, and I kind of like the little weird and wacky stories like I mentioned last week, and there's something about them that really just bring me joy, and it's simple reading, it's fun, and they're the ones that I read the quickest, like the weirdest ones. But it's just something that you don't see every day. And also towards the end, Lex Luthor has to use the life ray, as he calls it, on the massive steel Superman statue that they planted in Metropolis. So you kind of see them going head to head, and you see Superman, the real Superman, use his statue to defeat Lex Luthor at the end, which I think is just a bit of fun. Personally, it's probably one of my favourite that I've read so far. And yeah, I think I've mentioned it before, the ones that I don't particularly like at the moment, or I don't enjoy reading at the moment, are anything to do with the prankster. There's just something about him that I really don't like. And it's probably, I think mostly it's the way he's drawn and how sort of conniving he is. And a lot of people have compared him to Mixie. I'm not going to try and say the full name because I've been ridiculed before for saying it wrong. But I think, yeah, I just think there's an obvious difference between the two. Mix is kind of light-hearted, and, well, I guess they both are, but I don't know, there's something, the way Mixie does it, it's better, and he kind of does get one up on Superman quite a lot, whereas the prankster's just kind of, I just find him really annoying, to be honest. And yeah, I know he's used in comics later on, and I think I'm pretty sure he has a different design and a slightly different persona, but the Golden Age prankster, I'm not a fan of, I have to say. But thank you guys for tuning into episode 2, and I hope to see you again for episode 3 coming next week. Bye.